Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to this session on No Code for No Touch Legal Services. My name is Evan Wong. I am the co-founder and CEO of Checkbox. But today I am joined by Richard Conway. Richard Conway is the Deputy Group General Counsel and the Group Company Secretary for Coca-Cola Amatil. I'm going to do a bit of an intro and then I'll hand it over to Richard to kick off. But Richard is obviously working at an ASX-listed beverages company, but prior to that, he was an M&A lawyer at Herbert Smith Freehills in Sydney, but also in Moscow. So I believe he knows a bit of Russian. I remember him speaking with some of our Russian colleagues. Prior to that, like many leaders in the in-house legal teams, Richard has faced the challenges involved in meeting the needs of large, complex, and high-paced businesses, whilst at the same time trying to ensure that the in-house team does more than just survive. So after a few years of trial and error, the Coca-Cola Amatil legal team is now a high-performing, award-winning, and a happy team that's driving positive changes in its business. The best piece of professional advice that Richard has been given is to just say yes and see how it goes. And I definitely live by that mantra as well. So with that, I welcome you, Richard. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks very much, Evan, and thanks everyone for joining us.
Awesome. So look, I'm really excited to have this conversation. You're someone that I wildly respect as a professional and as a lawyer, and you're much more than a lawyer, which is probably why we're talking today. Just for the audience who may not be as familiar with Coca-Cola Amatil and specifically the legal team, if we can set the scene, can you give a brief introduction to how big is the business? How many lawyers are there, and what kind of work you in the legal team would be spending your time on?
Yep, sure. So Coca-Cola Amatil, so we're obviously the Coca-Cola bottler for the Asia Pacific region. We have operations in Australia, New Zealand, Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and also the Pacific Islands, so Samoa and Fiji in particular. In terms of size of our business, so we have about 12,000 employees, and then across those territories, we have over 800,000 customers. Thinking about our legal team, so across 4 of those 6 territories, we've got 14 lawyers and 3 support staff. And in terms of what the legal team does, generally speaking, our legal team does, I would say, a lot of everything. They're working all up and down the organisation. So we support our board and our executive team from a secretarial perspective. We do the legal work on strategic transactions, customer contracts, supplier contracts, the whole gambit. I think really in terms of what the legal team does, it's better to think more about what they don't do. So our legal team tend to all be generalists. So what the kind of legal work we don't do is when stuff gets really specialized. So things like property, leasing and purchasing, that kind of thing, we would outsource that kind of stuff. But a lot of the rest of the legal work we do in-house.
Got it. Yeah, and I guess, and thanks for that background. You pride yourself, I know that, and I said it in my introduction of you, where you're not just looking to survive as a legal team, and you've won sort of awards as a team for this. It's that ability to innovate and also leverage technology. And innovation is not always technology, but they go hand in hand. What role does technology and innovation play in the current team at Coca-Cola's legal team?
Yep. So we have a number of legal technology tools, Evan, that our team would interact with on a day-to-day basis. But I would say that we do think those more as tools, and they may or may not be innovative depending on what you're using them for, I guess. So we have things like a matter management tool, which is fantastic for keeping track of what everyone in the team is doing every day, and a number of other tools like that. But I would, I guess, emphasize your point that you said before, that innovation and technology are different things. They're often linked, I suppose, but it's really innovation that's become a really critical part of how our team operates over the last couple of years. Although I think we don't we don't have a really formal innovation program that we undertake. Instead, what we've really been able to do through a combination of trying and a bit of dumb luck and a pretty open team is developing a culture where everyone's thinking about how they can improve what they're doing on an incremental basis over time. So everyone in our team, I think, sees the benefit of doing that, and we give a lot of freedom for our team to innovate in areas that kind of interest them and to innovate in their own way. So for some people, that's heavily technology focused because they're interested in those tools and stretching them and using, getting the most out of what we pay for those things. But for other people, it's totally not about that. It's just about the innovating the way that you work in a more general sense. So yeah.
And I love the fact that you're mentioning that you don't have a formal innovation program, because I feel like a lot of legal teams feel like there's a barrier when there isn't sort of that mandate or that resource or that time available to actually go and innovate. So I want to dive into that a bit more in detail in a second. But before we get into that, I think it's important for us to tackle the why, right? Because there's no point talking about all the ways we can innovate if people don't understand why should we even consider it in the first place. Particularly given legal teams are so, busy with really the amount of work that they have to support, it sort of often comes across as an argument of why don't we just keep our heads down, get the work done? Why sort of, have time to go and fix things when you should just go and do things, right? So, why did, Coca-Cola's Amatil's legal team and yourself choose to innovate rather than just sort of get the work done?
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer that in two parts, Evan. So firstly, I'll answer why we did choose to innovate, and then I might answer on, in retrospect, why I think you should choose to innovate, which is a bit different to why we did choose to innovate. Really, we looked at changing the way we did things from a purely practical motivation, which I think drives lots of in-house teams, which is small team wasn't keeping up with the workload. And when you looked into the future, you could see that workload was only going to be increasing. So there was just a burning platform to change the way that we were doing things. Otherwise, it just wasn't going to work. So that was really why we chose to innovate. I guess what I would say, after obviously having that burning platform is great to get people out of their chairs and doing something. But really, I don't think innovating is just about doing more with less or anything or that kind of thing. The real benefit to doing it, I think, is about the mindset that gets developed in your team if people are looking at how they're doing the work that they're doing. So I think looking at our team and what Coca-Cola Amatil needs, we really need people who are not only analysing the legal issues in their work, but they're also analysing and constantly thinking about how the work's delivered. So we, 2 years ago, we couldn't afford to continue delivering legal work the way we were then. And I'm pretty sure that in 2 years' time, we won't be able to continue to be delivering legal work the same way we are now. So I think having a mindset where people are constantly doing their job, but also thinking, hey, the way that job is delivered doesn't make sense in a particular way or can be improved and smoothed out in various different ways, and constantly implementing those kind of changes is really important. And then the other thing I think is a real benefit to sort of critically analysing how you're doing your job is really the first thing it makes you think about is where does your legal work fit in with the broader picture of that work? And obviously, as we all know, a preparation of a contract or negotiation of a contract is only a step in a business process which starts much earlier than that, and often and continues for a long time, often after you've signed the contract as well. So if we really want our lawyers to be more commercial, understanding where their role fits into that broader picture, I think, is really critical. So that I see as the real reason why you choose to innovate.
Yeah, fantastic. And you've completely nailed it. I mean, and that's probably why you see a big trend as well in legal teams trying to become more strategic for the business. It's a shift in mindset, as you say, from being just the end of the process to sign off on risk or certain engagement, actually part of the conversation, understanding that legal is like a linchpin of many different processes in the business passing through. If we use the overused example of an NDA, it's, legal doesn't exist to create NDAs. The NDA is in the process of a much bigger, say, procurement exercise, right? And so having the understanding of that overall end-to-end and where we fit in and how we can add value across the chain, completely agree with that. That's awesome. So that's awesome. I want to now drill into what you alluded to earlier, which is, I come across a lot of teams who are maybe, legal teams of 1 to 5 to, similar to yourselves, about 12 to 13 lawyers. And I guess a lot of them see the challenge of, well, we're such a small legal team. How do we actually go and, we understand the importance of innovation and technology, but as a legal team of, X, we're a small team. How do we actually go and take action on this, particularly given that nowadays there's such a big sort of movement in the legal operations role as well? It almost creates this thought of, well, I'm not given a legal operations mandate, or I don't have a legal operations responsibility or role. So how do I actually go and make this happen? How did you make it happen at Coca-Cola?
Yeah, so we didn't make it happen smoothly, and again, it's been a learning process for us. So I'll give you some responses both in terms of what we actually did and then what I think you actually do. So we don't have the luxury or the benefit of a dedicated legal operations person. So we just started with some projects that we thought we needed to do and got our heads down. We definitely bit off much more than we could chew for a team that it is very hard if you've got a team who are doing operational legal work and they have demands from the business, and then you've got these improvement projects which constantly get pushed down by more urgent day-to-day work. So I do think that biting off an amount that you can actually chew and deliver reasonably quickly is important, which is not what we did. So we chose a quite big project to start off with, and as a result of that constant level of other things coming up and getting higher priority than that, it took us about 18 months to deliver our first project, which feels outrageous in retrospect. So I think what works much better for us now, and I guess the approach that I would recommend for teams that don't have someone that they can dedicate towards it, is really start incrementally. Start with try to get every member of the team working on things that work for them, and making small improvements quickly that you can implement quickly creates free time, and then you can dedicate more time to actually doing more formal and bigger projects. So I think that can be a challenge for people to start off with, because one, it's easier to identify, I think, big projects that you feel like are going to be game changers. And when you look at incremental things, you kind of think, well, why would I bother? Because it's not going to change the game. But I do think that, 10 incremental things delivered monthly, over the course of a year or something like that, are going to do just as much for you as one big project. And your one big project, which you think is going to take 6 months, will probably take you a lot longer if you're trying to juggle a workload of contracts or whatever legal work you're doing. So start incrementally, start with simple, easy wins, and just move on from there, and just do it as a constant process is what I would recommend.
And that's really good advice. I think, particularly in the legal profession, we're trained to be I guess, holistic and perfect in the outputs that we create. But in terms of innovation, that iterative, agile approach is definitely the way to go. And even when you talk about big projects, the ability to, maybe the big project is the right project, but knowing how to slice and dice that into phases so that it is a whole bunch of small, as you say, 10 pieces that might make up that big project is the right mindset to have. So that's great advice. I hope everyone learns a lot from that. Now, I do want to talk about Checkbox for a little bit as well. Of course, at Coca-Cola Amatil, you use Checkbox. I realized that I didn't even introduce Checkbox at the beginning of this session. So maybe you can do the honors. If you can explain roughly, what sort of problems were you looking to solve? Checkbox aside, what problems were you facing as a legal team at Coca-Cola Amatil? And I guess, how did Checkbox help you resolve those problems?
Yeah. So a couple of things there. I guess initially when we started looking at technologies like Checkbox, it was really driven by wanting to start some document automation. But I think when looking at document automation specific tools, I guess what I quickly came to realize is a lot of things that we were trying to automate. The document wasn't necessarily the key part of it. The process might be a key part that you're trying to automate or something else. So the document would often be a part, as I said, of a larger process, a larger business process, which involves a lot more not document-based aspects to it. So that kind of got me to looking at more flexible tools that could automate not only documents, but processes, calculations, analyses, and that kind of thing as well. And so that led us to Checkbox, which I guess to explain to everyone, it's a it's a platform where you can build your own automation apps is the simplest way to describe it. So we have a bunch of lawyers building apps in that. So it's no code. You don't have to be a computer programmer or have done any of that kind of stuff to be able to use it. And you build your own apps, which are obviously, because you're building them yourself, highly bespoke to your organization and your circumstances. And one of the other things I guess we saw as a benefit of it is perhaps something that a lot of legal teams suffer from is that they're not customer number one for the internal IT team, and projects for the legal team. Like obviously at Amatil, we have to prioritize our sales team when we're looking at IT projects, and after the sales team, it's probably the people and culture team, etc. So the legal team of 14 comes pretty low on the list, and that means that if you have a bright idea and you want the IT team to deliver it for you, then you get prioritized accordingly, unfortunately. So having a tool where we could do some of these things ourselves meant we got our IT team obviously involved up front to make sure they were comfortable with the platform, and set some parameters around what we would and wouldn't do in it. But after that, we're kind of away and we build our own things. We launch them ourselves. If they don't work, it's us who are to blame, not the IT team. And then the final thing I would say is that we were also looking for a tool that wasn't legal specific, because as I said, a lot of the processes we're looking at are not inherently legal processes. It's a business process with legal aspect. And if you're looking at automating those kind of things, I don't think there's a great deal of point automating just the legal bit. You want to be automating the end-to-end process ultimately. So we wanted to have a tool that would be useful across our business. And actually, one of the great things about Checkbox is it's not actually the legal team who are building most of the apps in there. I think it's actually our people and culture team who are doing most of the stuff at the moment. And it's a really beautiful outcome in the small number of cases we've had where it's actually the people and culture team who are building apps that have a legal aspect to them, and the legal team just helps with building the legal part.
I love that. And One of the things that I actually really, really love when you started using Checkbox was you coined this concept of no touch or low touch legal services. And that's kind of the theme of this session as well. Can you explain what you mean by this and walk us through an example of this kind of no touch or low touch legal service concept?
Yeah. So basically, it's the concept, I guess, one of the dangers I see around automation that I think legal teams need to be aware of is you automate something and then you lose control of it. Or you lose visibility of it, and I think that's something you really have to think about when you innovate in general. If you create user-driven ways of delivering legal work, how do you actually know what people are doing and understand how much activity or how little activity is going on there? So with a tool like Checkbox, what you're able to do, which I think is really important, is you can build an app that's either no touch from a legal team perspective. So your example there might be your standard NDA. I think lots of us don't really see any value in looking at a standard day-to-day NDA. So you can create a no touch version of that, which your business can use. But you do need to make sure you understand how many are getting created, who they're with, and ideally you're actually capturing copies of those things. So you need to create tools that help you do that. And then on the low touch example, I guess it's a form, Evan, of legal triage. So if you've automated a contract and you want to be able to create a way for, in some circumstances, it might be created and go direct to the user. So that's your no touch example. Whereas in other cases, it would trigger some thresholds that would come to the legal team. And it's low touch in that scenario because the way that we've tried to configure those apps in Checkbox is your legal team doesn't just get dumped the contract and told, review this contract. We've configured the app to say, this app will only come to the legal team in circumstances A, B, or C. And then, so when it actually comes to the legal team, it says, hey, legal team, this has come to you for reason B. Therefore, the action you need to take is whatever the results of that are. So it really cuts down the amount of time that the legal team is spending on these activities because it's very targeted what they need to do. And you have high confidence that the rest of the contract or process is being done in a way that you originally designed it. And so that also changes the path of least resistance for the legal team. Whereas in the past, if you just got a contract by email from your business stakeholder saying, hey, can you look at this contract? It just kind of goes on the pile and gets done when you can do it, because you don't know before you open the document how much work is involved. Whereas with the low touch sort of triaged approach, when you get these notifications from your app, you really have a good understanding straight away of how much work there is to do. And so if it's simple, you just do it straight away, which obviously your business users really love because it cuts down things which were taking days to taking hours, just by the sort of psychology of it, really.
Yeah, it's really funny because when you mention it like that, it's sometimes I feel the same. I don't know how much work is in an email, and I'm scared to click on certain emails in the same way that you're probably scared of how much work is in a particular document that's sent to you for review. Awesome. So I know you've sort of alluded to some of the benefits of creating these sort of experiences, but are you able to share any sort of outcomes? Anything you can share so far with the use of Checkbox?
Yeah, so we're probably 14 months into our building apps with Checkbox, and we've had some pretty, I would say, amazing outcomes so far. So certainly from an efficiency perspective, we've been able to deliver some things which would have taken hundreds of hours in much less time than that. So An example of that is we had an unfortunate circumstance where we realized that our leave system had miscalculated people's annual leave and sick leave in the system. So we had to write to hundreds of employees to explain to them what the mistake was and what the correct figures were and how we'd calculated that, etc. The tricky thing with that was, of the hundreds of people, 90% it was only a minor issue, and so it was a really simple approach, whereas for a small number of people the issue was much more significant, and so you need to take a different tone in the way that you communicate that kind of thing to people. And there were a couple of individuals who were just the only one in their particular situation, so they really needed something quite bespoke. So option A was kind of like use a mail merge kind of thing in Microsoft Word, in which case obviously you get hundreds of largely identical letters or communications to employees, which you can then either send out that way, or you can do it, or you can manually change the individual ones. And then option B was to build a checkbox app for that, which lets you, one, automate the creation of quite bespoke communications to particular groups of employees who are affected in different ways. So you can say, you can have something quite short and simple to the people who are not impacted significantly, and then you can have something which provides more information and more reassurance for people who are affected more significantly. And then the other thing, which was a real benefit out of it, so to some extent you could think about that part of the app as a very complicated bespoke mail merge. But the other thing the app was able to deliver was communication, a summary for leaders of the people who were impacted, telling them the information, summarizing the information for all of the people who they were managers of, who were impacted, explaining to them how the communications should go to those people, etc. So that's like probably a really good example of not really a legal process, a legal issue, but not really fundamentally a people and culture type process that we were able to do in Checkbox. And when you actually get to the point of creating all of those communications, it basically, so you build the app, and then effectively you have all of your different scenarios in an Excel file, which you load into Checkbox, and it produces these hundreds of documents in about 5 or 10 minutes. So pretty amazing in terms of the efficiency at that end. The other things we've been able to do is just, which is an example of these incremental things which really provide a benefit to you and your legal team on a day-to-day constant basis, is creating apps like our NDA app. So I wouldn't talk about the NDA app specifically because everyone wants to do it and it's a really highly used tool, but we've been able with Checkbox to connect that tool to our matter management system, our document management system, and DocuSign. And that's where things start to get really powerful, right? Because not only are our users having a no-touch NDA most of the time, but the legal team captures the data in our matter management system of that use. So it's not a separate set of data for us. It's the same set of data as all other legal activity. The document gets routed to the right people in DocuSign at the end. So we're pretty confident and happy about the signatures that come through with that. And then it gets automatically captured in our document management system at the end of the process as well. So no one has to go and manually file that. The business user doesn't really even know any of that stuff is happening. But if in a year's time, someone comes and says to us, hey, Joe in sales, I think he signed an NDA with whoever customer, but he left 6 months ago, we've captured it in our document management system and we can find it there. So that's really good example of something that just saves someone in the legal team probably, only a couple of minutes, but it's a couple of minutes every single time one of these things happens.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. That's incredible. And unfortunately, we are out of time. But I wanted to just say a big thank you again to you, Richard, for spending your time here, sharing your insights on all things innovation around legal teams, particularly representing those who are not the giant sort of legal teams of the world. I think there's a lot that people have gotten out of this. So thank you for joining me, and thank you to everyone else who have tuned in for this session. We wish you have a great rest of the conference experience. Thanks, Richard.
Thanks, Evan. Thanks, everyone.